In 1942, my father, Richard Berry, was 18 years old. He was attending Boston College, studying to be a teacher, and seriously considering going into seminary to become a priest. However, everything changed when he was drafted. He came from a family of 4 children, and much like his father, who was called into World War I, he and his brother Jack were both drafted into service in World War II. Jack went into the Signal Corps, and my father went into a special program where the Army was training new officers. However, he ended up being sent off to combat when the Army realized they had overestimated the number of officers they would need and underestimated the number of combat soldiers they would need. He tried to get into the paratroopers, but that was full. As he liked to joke, everyone thought that if you had to fight anyhow, flying to the fight beats walking to it. He was in the 101st Infantry Regiment, which was part of the 26th Infantry Division, also known as the Yankee Division. My father fought as part of the 3rd Army, which was popularly referred to as Patton's 3rd Army. My father's unit arrived in England after training and soon went into the fight. They landed near Omaha Beach at Le Havre, France. They were the first round of reinforcements after the D-Day invasions. He and his unit fought and walked across much of France. He had many stories which he was reluctant to speak of, but there was one that he often told. It was his favorite story, and the one that had little to do with the events of the war. The story was about his brother Jack, and it happened right before my father earned his Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. It was early November 1944 when my company, L Company, 101st Infantry, captured the town of Moyenvic, France, grabbed the bridge on the far side of town before the Germans could blow it, and captured the hill on the far side of town. However, we had the back slope of the hill, the Germans had the front slope. German tanks circled around to our position and opened up on us with their 88 artillery shells. We were getting the crap beat out of us. In the middle of all this, my sergeant came slithering up to my foxhole on his belly and said to me, "Hey Rick, your brother is down the hill in Moyenvic and wants to say hello." I couldn't believe it. I knew my brother was 200 miles to the north of us with the Signal Corps Battalion. I cautiously snaked my way down to Moyenvic, and there, in the center of town, sitting on the hood of his Jeep, was my brother Jack, with that big Irish grin splitting his face. Being in the Signal Corps, he had picked up on his radio the location of the 26th Infantry Division and locked into where L Company was located. Somehow, he had traversed 200 miles in his Jeep through countless MP checkpoints, gone through all MP questioning, and managed to pick me out of my foxhole when thousands upon thousands of infantrymen were positioned all along the front lines. We talked and talked and talked, mostly about home, some about the war and how we were doing. As we were talking, a photographer from the Stars and Stripes, the official Army newspaper, took our picture and published it, not only in the Army newspaper, but in our hometown paper, the Boston Globe. You can imagine my parents' amazement when they saw 2 of their sons in it. Finally we parted, me back to my foxhole and Jack with 200 miles to get back to his company. It was an incredible journey and one I will never forget. Within a day or 2 of this meeting, my father was seriously wounded when a shell exploded nearby, killing the other soldiers with him. This is when he received the Purple Heart medal. He was in a coma for 2 weeks, and after recovering, he returned to his unit. He remained in Germany until 1946, and during that time, he and his unit liberated the Gusen concentration camp. There were a couple stories. Again, he was very reluctant to tell the war stories, but there were a couple times where happened to him more than once. Once was when he received his Purple Heart, but there was other times where, at least one other time, where everyone with him was killed but him. So in terms of growing up and hearing that, he never made a big deal about it, but you got impacted by it when he said it, because it's like he survived something he shouldn't have survived, the war overall, and then at least 2 instances where everyone else with him was killed. and he was the sole survivor, in one of which he received the Purple Heart. So that left a lasting mark with me. There's also a story where he spent several days behind enemy lines. The war lines were very confusing, and they could overrun you, you could overrun them, little bubbles and pockets everywhere. And there was about 2 to 3 days where he was stuck behind enemy lines without any food. He actually snuck into a German camp that he found, cut in the back of the tent, and stole a can of peaches, ran off into the woods and ate them because he was starving. So that was kind of an interesting story. One of the souvenirs he picked up was a German officer's Luger. And when he was behind enemy lines and he found, uh-oh, I might get caught, he ditched that thing real quick. Because if you got caught with that by the Germans, there was not going to be a surrender. They knew you had taken down a German officer, and they were not going to take kindly to that. It marks a moment in time. It's something you look at and just seems like it was a different world and a different person. But every time I look at it, I seem to find something new. It really shows the difference between what they were doing. The story itself, or the picture itself, tells an entire story. You can see from the helmet straight down, they're different. He's got netting so they could put in twigs and things like that because they were trying to hide. He wasn't. Jack had the smooth helmet because although he was in danger, it was more of a behind the lines type danger. The uniform, Jack's is all pressed and nice. The pants are all ironed and nice. My father's, it's all wrinkled, pockets bulging with stuff, food, not peaches, but food. The wrinkles, dirt, mud. You can see here the shoes are all muddy. Jack's are fairly clean. The rifles even, they were issued, and the equipment. My father's got a canteen of water because you don't know when you're going to find water. He's got hand grenades across. He's got ammunition belt on. Pockets, actually, from what I remember, he told me, were full of hand grenades and extra ammo. Jack, flat pockets, no equipment belt. The rifle he's got is, I think, a .30 caliber carbine. The rifle my father has was a standard issue for the infantrymen, an M1 Garand. And something I actually noticed recently looking at it, if you look here, he's got a knife attached, and that is a bayonet that affixes to the end. But if you look carefully in the shadow, you can see that he already has a bayonet affixed. Remember, when this story took place, he was in the face of the enemy, and you never knew when it was going to get hand to hand. And there were a couple instances, not necessarily at this point, I think it was later, where there was hand-to-hand combat. So just very interesting, tells a story on its own. Both my father and his brother survived the war. After the war, Jack became a Boston police officer. He retired as superintendent in charge of the homicide department. My father worked in the spirits industry for 40 years until he retired in 1995. He went on to have 6 children, 14 grandchildren, and many more great-grandchildren.